Hello, dear friends. I'd like to talk about an idea from the book of Shmot, which we started a week and a half ago. And this is an idea from both Parashat Shmot and leads into Parashat VaEra, which we just read this past Shabbat. Now, the name of a book in antiquity is something which seems to be arbitrary. Because take, for instance, the Torah, the names of the books seem to be just the first words or the first word or from the first sentence. And in general, in antiquity, it seems to be that way for books. However, there seems to be a significance, despite this, in the words that are used at the beginning of each book. Now, the Ramban, Nachmanides, calls Shmot, or Exodus, the book of redemption, Sefer HaGeulah, because it's the first redemption from Egypt, which is supposed to mimic in a certain way the final redemption. And B'Nisan Yigalu, B'Nisan Atidin Ligael, we were redeemed the first time in the Hebrew month of Nisan, and we will eventually be redeemed in the month of Nisan as well. And but there's something which is interesting about the word Shmot. It's not only the name of the book, but the name, of course, of the first parsha of the first portion of the book. Shemot are names. Now, there's an interesting point that I think others have pointed out too, that at the beginning of Shemot, you have the names of the tribes who came down with Jacob to Egypt, and Joseph, of course, already was in Egypt. And then right away, in the first chapter of Shemot, you have this, what I call, experience of the loss of names. It says there was a new king in Egypt who couldn't remember Joseph. Didn't remember Joseph, almost like he forgot his name. He's also called the king of Egypt, and this is one of the few times where he's not called Pharaoh. Even though Pharaoh is not a particular name, but it is the appellation of all the kings of Egypt. So he's called the king of Egypt, and it's almost like they forgot that he's also called Pharaoh. And it says, Vayomer Elamo, he said to his people, doesn't even say that they're Egyptians. And then, of course, we have the story of the Miyaldot, the midwives, Shifra and Pua, which, interestingly enough, according to the Midrash, that's not even the real names. It's Yocheved and Miriam. Okay, that's Midrashic, but it just continues with this line of the loss of names. And then if we move forward to chapter 2, this line of thought continues. There's a man from the tribe of Levi who marries a woman from the tribe of Levi, and they're nameless. And they have a son, and he is nameless. And after 3 months of trying to hide this boy, she's not able to do so. So she puts him in the Nile within the bulrushes. And then Pharaoh's daughter, who is nameless in the text, sends her servant, who is nameless, to look at the boy and bring him closer. And then the sister of the boy, who is nameless, we know the name, but is nameless at this point, says to Pharaoh's daughter, should I bring you somebody from the Hebrews to nurse him until he's old enough? She says, okay. And she brings the mother. And then when Moses is nursed, they bring him to the palace. And Pharaoh's daughter, who is still nameless, gives him the name Moses, in Hebrew, Moshe. So Moses receives his name from Pharaoh's daughter. And all of a sudden, the names are now coming back. Why do the names disappear, and why do they come back with Moses? You see, slaves have no name because they are looked at as without identity. They are numbers. They are means to an end. In fact, you don't want to know their name. It's too personal. So a slave is basically a number. The Jewish people who were enslaved, the Israelites who were enslaved in Egypt, became without identity, less than human. They needed a Moses who would taste freedom and grow up in the palace to be somebody who would be able to redeem them. Because a slave eventually gives into his situation and thinks that there's no way out. So Moses had to grow up a free man in order to be the Redeemer. And Moses has a name because he is free. And the interesting thing is that the Hebrew name of Moses, Mem, Shin, Hey, Moshe, if you play around with the letters, it spells Hashem, the name. Because Moses is going to return the name to the Israelites. He's going to give them an identity. Now we know the story with Moses, where he goes out to his brethren after he grows up. And when he goes out to his brethren, he sees an Egyptian man smiting a Hebrew slave. Moses can't deal with this. And it says in the verse, Moses went out to his brethren. That was a big move. Moses could have just ignored his relationship to the Hebrews. He's in the palace. He's been saved. He's looked at as royalty. He's not looked at as a Hebrew. He's really endangering this status by going out to see his brethren. And it says that he sees an Egyptian who is smiting a Hebrew of his brethren twice, which means he's already thinking, I really should be part of them. And then he smites the Egyptian. He can't bear to see this. The Yaakov Turim, Yaakov ben Yechiel Turim, who wrote commentary in the Bible called Balatur, where we have, he says that if you take the word Hamitzri, the Egyptian, it is the same numerical value in Hebrew as Moshe. So when Moshe is smiting the Egyptian, he's destroying his Egyptian identity. He cannot go back to the palace anymore. And when he realizes that people know what happened, he runs off to Midian. So smiting that Egyptian literally was smiting his Egyptian identity because he cannot go back to the palace. Many years later, God appears to Moshe and says, Moshe, I want you to go down to Egypt. And God says, I'm going to take my people out, and I want you to do it. Moshe hesitates, which is another discussion, but not now. And then Moshe says, okay, you want me to be the one to take them out of Egypt? I'm paraphrasing. I'm giving their name back. So let's start from ABC. If they ask me what your name is, what am I going to say? Moses says to God, if they ask me your name, what am I to say? So God says, I will be which I will be. Eheyeh asher eheyeh. This is very interesting. Moshe says, look, I'm supposed to give them their name. I'm supposed to give them their identity as a redeemer. What's your name? Let's start there. God says, I will be which I will be. Tell them I will be sent you. Now, this is interesting because Maimonides, in his Mishnah Torah, in Yesodei Torah, where he enumerates, according to Hebrew law, we don't erase names of God which are considered direct names of God. You can write them, you cannot erase them, according to Jewish law. Maimonides enumerates 7 names of God which cannot be erased. Eheyeh, I will be, is not one of them. So when God was saying to Moses, I will be which I will be, according to Maimonides, he was just saying, he wasn't saying his name, he was saying, I will be which I will be. Some of the Kabbalists, like Joseph G. Katila, do consider it a name, but that's a discussion by itself, which I have more to say about very soon. But then that's where this week's Parsha comes in, VaEra. Because God says to Moses, after Moses was a dismal failure the first time in Egypt, because instead of Pharaoh freeing the Israelites, he actually made the work more burdenous. And the Israelites themselves were dismayed, the elders. And Moses says, Lama hare'ota la'am hazeh. Why did you make things worse for this people? Lama zeshnachlani. Why did you even send me? God says, don't worry, you'll see, everything will be fine. And then in this week's Parsha, God opens up by saying, I appeared, VaEra, El Avraham, El Yitzchak, VeYaakov, El Shaddai. I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the name El Shaddai. But the Ushmi Hashem lo nadati lehem, but the special name, the Tetragrammaton, the four-letter name of God. The Yud Ke Vav Ke Yud, and then Hey, then Vav Hey, Shem Havaya. I didn't tell them. Now Rashi points out here that what does it mean I didn't tell him? Abraham calls God by the Tetragrammaton, by Shem Havaya, by the four-letter name. So Rashi says it's not that they weren't aware of the name, but what that name represents is promises kept, which means I promised the forefathers they would get a land, they would be a plentiful people, but that promise didn't come to fruition during their time. But you, Moses, what I promise is going to happen in your lifetime. And therefore, I am now revealing to you the power of that four-letter name, which is promises that are going to happen and come to fruition. But another interesting thing here is that in this week's Parsha, Moshe is being told God's name, as if, because Yud Ke Vav Ke, the four-letter name, was considered the main name of God in the Bible, and that's our tradition. So what God did not say in Parashat Shmot, he's now saying, meaning Moshe, we're in this together now, we're a team. Okay, I'm telling you the name that you're going to call me by. It's called Yud Ke Vav Ke. It's actually ineffable. You can't even pronounce it, but that's the name. And that's the name that's going to take them out of Egypt. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, in his Covenanting Conversations, has a take on this week's Parsha VaEra, where he says, well, I'll put it in my words, because he says, he calls it the beginning of history. It might be, you might say, the beginning of God's involvement in human history in a significant way, because until VaEra, okay, God sends punishment from afar, you might say. But here, for the first time in VaEra, God is now getting involved in history to save a whole people from slavery. This is a new relationship between God and the world. It's not just God watching over and letting this king do that, or some natural catastrophe is going to happen on Sodom and Gomorrah. God-based, of course. But no, God is now going to go in, save the people from slavery in Egypt. That's the name Havaya, the four-letter name of God, where God is now going to have a subjective relationship with mankind through the Israelites. Now, so Moses then is going to bring the name back to the people. What is the name and what is the job of Moses? Moses is a leader who has two tasks. Task number one is to redeem the people from slavery. Task number two is to teach them who they are, what their identity is, what is their name. That's really what a leader needs to do. Not just to be a politician to get you from point A to point B, not even just to free you, but to give direction, to give meaning. When the state of Israel was created, the early Zionists, let's say, from 1897, from the Basel Congress, first Congress of the Herzlian Zionist movement, when they pondered the meaning of the eventual state of Israel, they said it'll be a shelter for Jews against anti-Semitism, because they were looking for a very low common denominator that everybody would agree upon. But when the state was founded, of course, the next question was, now what? So we have a state, we have an army, we have Jews are coming in. What is the goal of this state? Because true leadership is not enough just to take you out of slavery. There's got to be a goal. It's only part one. Now that the baby's been born, which way is it going to go? What are the values it's going to believe in? What type of meaning is it going to look for in its life? So the real leadership of Moses is double. It's both to take them out of Egypt, to bring them towards the land, which Joshua will finish, and to give them that identity. Therefore, he brings them before Sinai, and they get the Torah during the 40 years of the desert. because real leadership needs both, and the Jewish people need both. And today, at the events that are happening now with these wars, we need not only victory over our enemies, we need to understand what is going on with us. Which way are we going? What is the meaning of our situation? And that will give us the ultimate ability to persist as a people. Shalom, shalom.